Canada has long been seen as a global beacon for multiculturalism and economic opportunity. Yet as the country grapples with unprecedented housing pressures, strained public services, and evolving public sentiment, its immigration policy is undergoing radical change. In a dramatic policy shift, the government has announced sweeping cuts to both permanent and temporary immigration targets for the coming years. Changes that critics warn could force millions of temporary residents and even some longtime immigrants to leave the country. This video explores the details behind the new rules for 2025, explains their rationale, and examines their potential implications for Canada's social, economic, and political landscape. So, here's the list of new immigration rules may force millions to leave Canada in 2025. Before we start, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment your thought. Here we go. Number 1. A new chapter in Canadian immigration policy. For decades, Canada's immigration system was celebrated for its openness and its role in fueling economic growth and population expansion. In the wake of the pandemic, the government had dramatically increased immigration targets to address labor shortages and stimulate economic recovery. However, as the dust settled, mounting evidence showed that this rapid growth placed an enormous strain on housing, healthcare, and other essential services. Recent polls indicate that a growing share of Canadians believe that immigration levels are out of control, sparking political debate and forcing policymakers to reconsider previous expansionary strategies. In response, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government has unveiled a new plan for 2025 to 2027 that significantly reduces the number of new immigrants allowed into Canada. The reforms extend not only to permanent residents, but also to temporary residents, such as international students and foreign workers. While the government insists that these changes will create a controlled and sustainable immigration system, critics warn that such measures risk leaving millions of temporary residents, those who have contributed to Canada's economy for years, without a pathway to permanent residency, effectively forcing them to leave. Number 2. Tightening permanent resident targets. One of the most eye-catching elements of the new plan is a reduction in targets for permanent residents. Under previous policies, the government had set ambitious goals of welcoming up to 500,000 new permanent residents annually. In a sharp reversal, the new plan calls for 395,000 new permanent residents in 2025, 380,000 in 2026, 365,000 in 2027. This represents a substantial cut, roughly a 21% decrease from the earlier target for 2025. The government justifies this rollback by citing rising housing prices, stressed public services, and a general public sentiment that Canada is already overburdened. Prime Minister Trudeau recently admitted, "In the tumultuous times as we emerge from the pandemic, we didn't get the balance right between addressing labor needs and managing population growth." From an economic standpoint, lower immigration targets aim to alleviate pressure on the housing market and ensure that infrastructure, healthcare, education, transportation is better able to meet Canadians' needs. However, such cuts risk sidelining immigrants who are already in the country on temporary visas and were counting on a smooth transition to permanent residency. Number 3. Reining in temporary residents. Perhaps even more consequential are the measures targeting temporary residents. Canada's temporary population, which includes international students, temporary foreign workers, and other visa holders, has surged in recent years. The new plan sets an ambitious goal to reduce temporary residents as a share of the national population from 7% to 5% by the end of 2026. Under the new targets, the government projects that total temporary resident arrivals will drop from 673,650 in 2025 to 516,600 in 2026, with a modest rebound to 543,600 in 2027. This steep decline, particularly in the 2025 to 2026 period, is designed to force a transition. Many temporary residents are expected to either convert to permanent status through pathways, such as the Canadian Experience class, or leave the country, when their permits expire. The plan also features significant cuts in work permits issued through the International Mobility Program, a drop from 285,750 in 2025 to only 128,700 in 2026, while keeping the temporary foreign worker program flat at 82,000 permits annually. For international students, the government is introducing a cap on study permits that had previously been expanded to accommodate record numbers during the pandemic. These restrictions, alongside tougher eligibility requirements, mean that many students who once expected to transition to permanent residency may no longer have that option. Immigration Minister Mark Miller noted, "We must ensure that the system is sustainable, not only in numbers but also in how newcomers integrate and contribute to our society." Number 4. Express entry reforms. No more extra points for job offers. The express entry system has long been the cornerstone of Canada's economic immigration process. Under this points-based system, candidates with high scores in language proficiency, education, work experience, and even valid job offers have enjoyed enhanced chances of receiving invitations to apply ITAs for permanent residence. However, one of the more controversial reforms is the removal of additional points awarded for job offers. Effective in spring 2025, candidates in the express entry pool will no longer receive the extra 50 or 200 points for a valid job offer. The rationale, according to Immigration Minister Mark Miller, is to reduce fraud. By eliminating incentives for unscrupulous actors to illegally trade job offers or manipulate labor market impact assessments, LMIAs, the government aims to restore integrity to the process. Critics warn that this change would lower the overall comprehensive ranking system, CRS, scores for many candidates, particularly those who have relied on job offers to boost their profiles. Without those points, temporary residents already in Canada who are competing for permanent residency may find their pathways even more obstructed. For many, this could mean that without a valid job offer, they might not secure permanent status and will ultimately have to leave the country. Number 5. Overhauls in the temporary foreign worker program. The TFWP has drawn considerable scrutiny for its role in both filling labor shortages and, simultaneously, undermining workers' rights. Critics argue that the TFWP creates conditions ripe for exploitation and even modern-day slavery. Recent government measures now seek to tighten eligibility for temporary foreign workers, especially in the low-wage stream. Key changes include shorten the duration of work permits. For low-wage positions, work permits are now limited to 1 year, a reduction from the previous 2-year maximum. Stricter eligibility criteria. Employers are now required to adhere to tighter rules when hiring through the International Mobility Program and the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, with some sectors facing further restrictions, particularly in census metropolitan areas with unemployment rates above 6%. Prime Minister Trudeau has not shied away from harsh language on the subject. In one notable statement, he chastised corporations for exploiting cheap foreign labor and indicated that reforms were necessary to protect both Canadian workers and the temporary foreign workforce. Yet, while these measures may reduce exploitation, they could also leave temporary workers with no option to adjust their status, forcing them to return to their home countries if they cannot secure permanent residency. Number 6. Stricter rules for international students. International students have historically been one of the pillars of Canada's immigration system, bringing not only diverse talent, but also substantial economic benefits through tuition fees and local spending. However, amid rising concerns over housing shortages and the capacity of public services, the government has also targeted this group. One of the most significant changes is the imposition of a cap on the number of study permits issued. For instance, the government now projects that study permits will be reduced. One report indicates a drop from over 500,000 approvals in recent years to a new target of around 437,000 in 2025. Furthermore, the cancellation of expedited programs such as the Student Direct Stream SDS has added uncertainty to the process. In addition, new rules regarding post-graduation work permits PGWBs, meaning that eligibility criteria have become more stringent. For example, international students must now adhere to stricter enrollment and attendance requirements to qualify for a PGWB. Violations, even if unintentional, could result in visa revocations upon re-entry at the Canadian border, putting students at significant risk. Immigration lawyers warn that students who deviate from the prescribed rules, such as by working off campus beyond the allowed hours, face a heightened risk of being forced to leave Canada. Real-life accounts from international students highlight the growing anxiety. One student, interviewed by the New Indian Express, noted that even minor infractions can now trigger a visa cancellation at the port of entry. Such an environment of heightened scrutiny not only disrupts the lives of genuine students, but also undermines Canada's reputation as a welcoming destination. Number 7. Political and economic drivers behind the reforms. The sweeping changes in Canada's immigration policy come at a time of significant political turmoil and economic recalibration. Trudeau's government has faced mounting criticism for its open-door approach during the post-pandemic recovery. Recent opinion polls show that a large proportion of Canadians now believe that the country is over-immigrating, especially given the concurrent housing affordability crisis. In an unprecedented admission, Prime Minister Trudeau acknowledged that the government didn't get the balance right as it emerged from the pandemic. The political pressure is palpable. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre has accused Trudeau of destroying the immigration system and contributing to a crisis in housing and public services. Poilievre even suggested that if elected, his government would tie population growth to the rate of new housing construction, a radical departure from current policies. From an economic standpoint, while critics argue that lower immigration targets may cool the housing market and ease public service demands, business groups and economists warn of long-term consequences. Canada's aging population and historically low fertility rates mean that immigration is the only source of new labor and continued economic growth. Reducing the influx of immigrants could slow GDP growth and limit the country's capacity to fill critical labor shortages, even as real GDP per capita might see modest improvements due to a smaller population base. Trudeau's reform package is thus a double-edged sword. On one side, it aims to address domestic frustrations over housing and public services. On the other, it risks undercutting the very economic dynamism that has long defined Canada's immigration policy. Number 8. Forcing millions to leave. What does it mean? The headline, "New Immigration Rules May Force Millions to Leave Canada in 2025, is as provocative as it is complex. At its core, this assertion refers not to a mass deportation of established residents, but to the fate of millions of temporary residents, students, foreign workers, and others who may find themselves with no viable pathway to permanent residency. Under the new rules, temporary residents who do not secure permanent residency, with the tightened caps and reduced targets, many who are currently living in Canada on temporary permits may be forced to depart once their permits expire if they cannot convert their status. This includes those who might have previously relied on more flexible pathways to transition from temporary to permanent status. Increased visa cancellations at points of entry. New border protocols now empower immigration officers to cancel visas on the spot if they suspect non-compliance with the rules. For students and workers who inadvertently fall afoul of these stricter guidelines, the result could be immediate deportation rather than a lengthy appeals process. Reduced opportunities for in-Canada transitions. With more than 40% of the new permanent resident admissions in 2025 expected to come from in-Canada pathways, temporary residents who are unable to meet these enhanced criteria may effectively be priced out of the system. Critics warn that this could lead to a scenario where millions of individuals who have contributed to the economy, paid taxes, and integrated into local communities find themselves with no option but to leave. Migrant rights advocates argue that such measures risk turning temporary residents into a disposable workforce, subject to whims of shifting policy rather than secure long-term status. Number 9. Reactions from various stakeholders. Migrant rights advocates. Advocates for migrant rights have been among the most vocal critics of the new rules. They argue that reducing the numbers of both permanent and temporary residents without providing adequate pathways to permanence will have dire human consequences. As one spokesperson for Migrant Rights Network stated, cutting permanent resident numbers is a direct assault on migrants who will be forced to remain temporary or become undocumented, pushed further into exploitive jobs. The increased risk of visa revocation at the border, combined with stricter eligibility for work permits and study permits, has already led to rising anxiety among international students and foreign workers. For many, the fear of being abruptly forced to leave is becoming a constant source of stress. Business and economic voices. On the other side of the debate, business leaders and some economists have expressed concern that these measures could undermine Canada's economic competitiveness. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce and other industry groups warn that reducing immigration targets could exacerbate labor shortages, especially in key sectors such as healthcare, skilled trades, and technology. With Canada's native population aging rapidly, these sectors depend heavily on the steady influx of immigrants to sustain growth and innovation. Moreover, some in the business community fear that a significant reduction in temporary foreign workers may deter foreign investment, as companies find it increasingly difficult to secure the skilled labor needed to expand their operations. Political ramifications. Politically, the new immigration rules have become a flashpoint. Opposition parties, notably led by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, have seized upon the changes as evidence that the Liberal government has destroyed a once uncontroversial system. Poilievre argues that Trudeau's policies are contributing to rising housing costs and strained public services, and he has promised to tie immigration levels more closely to housing capacity if his party comes to power. Trudeau, however, maintains that the changes are necessary for a controlled, sustainable immigration system that better reflects the country's current capacity. In his view, the reforms are about balancing economic growth with social infrastructure, a balance that has proven elusive in recent years. Number 10. Long-term implications. A new reality for Canada? The new immigration rules for 2025 signal a fundamental shift in how Canada will manage its population growth. By drastically reducing the numbers of permanent and temporary residents, the government aims to ease pressures on housing, healthcare, education, and other public services. In theory, these measures could lead to a higher quality of life for those who remain, improving infrastructure, reducing overcrowding, and enabling more targeted investments. Yet, there is a clear trade-off. While a smaller influx of newcomers may provide temporary relief for housing and service pressures, it also poses significant risks. Economic growth. Immigrants have historically been a crucial driver of economic expansion in Canada. A reduced flow may slow labor force growth and limit the country's ability to innovate and compete globally. As the Parliamentary Budget Officer recently estimated, a reduction in immigration targets could lower Canada's overall GDP while increasing per capita GDP modestly due to a smaller population base. Social integration. For millions of temporary residents who have made Canada their home, the new rules could disrupt lives abruptly. Students, skilled workers, and their families may be forced to leave, leading to a loss of talent and a potential brain drain that could undermine Canada's long-term social and economic fabric. Political uncertainty. With the next federal election looming, immigration policy has become one of the most divisive political issues. The backlash against high immigration levels, fueled by concerns over housing affordability and social services, could reshape Canada's political landscape for years to come. These long-term implications make it clear that while the reforms might ease immediate pressures, they also risk creating a host of new challenges. The government must now balance its short-term goal of sustainability with the long-term need for continued economic dynamism and social cohesion. Number 11. Looking ahead, navigating a changing landscape. As Canada enters a new era of immigration policy, both policymakers and stakeholders face an uncertain future. The new rules are not just numbers on a page. They will have real human impacts on millions of people who currently live in Canada under temporary status and on the broader Canadian society. For temporary residents, the message is clear. The pathway to permanence is narrowing. Without meeting the new, stricter criteria, many may find themselves with no choice but to leave a country they've come to call home. For employers, the challenge will be to adapt to a reduced labor pool while still meeting industry demands. For politicians, the task is to reconcile a divided public opinion and create a system that supports both economic growth and social stability. In this climate of change, there is also room for hope. Advocates argue that a more controlled immigration system could ultimately lead to better integration outcomes, improved labor market conditions, and a more sustainable quality of life for all Canadians. But achieving this vision will require not only the careful calibration of targets and rules, but also significant investments in infrastructure and social services to support those who remain. For many, the stakes are incredibly high. The promise of Canadian citizenship and permanent residency has long been a lifeline for individuals seeking a better life. Now, with the revised targets and tougher criteria, that promise may be in jeopardy for millions of people who have already built lives in Canada. The conclusion. So, guys, this was a list of new immigration rules may force millions to leave Canada in 2025. Hope you will like it and appreciate it. Canada's new immigration rules for 2025 mark a radical departure from the country's previous policy of high volume, rapid population growth. By reducing permanent resident targets from 500,000 to 395,000 in 2025, and further cuts in subsequent years, and by imposing strict limits on temporary residents, the government aims to ease the pressure on housing, healthcare, and other critical public services. However, these changes come at a cost. The coming years will undoubtedly test the resilience of Canada's immigration system. For those currently residing in Canada on temporary visas, the stakes have never been higher. The government's promise of a controlled, sustainable system could very well come at the expense of those who have already laid down roots. As Canada navigates this tumultuous transition, all eyes will be on whether new policies can strike the delicate balance between economic necessity and social sustainability, or whether, as some fear, they will force millions to leave the country they once hoped to call home. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and press the bell icons for latest upcoming travel videos. Bye-bye, see you.